Let's now learn how we can take decisions with JavaScript using the if-else statements. But before we do that, let's clean up our code here a little bit. So I will just comment out everything that we just did. So remember how I mentioned that in JavaScript we write comments like this with these double slashes, but that's only true for one-line comments. So if I then write something below this, then it is no longer gray. So you see it's no longer a comment. But if we want a comment that spans over multiple lines, we can use the same comment style as in CSS. So slash star, and then all the way here, star and slash again. So all of this become gray. And so now this code is not doing anything, but we still have it here as a reference. Just don't comment out this call fact_age function because we will need it now. So with this, we cleaned up our output here a little bit. Let's just remove this hello world as well. Okay, here we go. And so now let's actually talk about if-else statements. And actually we need to go back because I want to copy these two lines of code so we don't have to write them again. So please go ahead and do the same. And now let's set these two both to 20, let's say. Okay, and now let's say that we want to do something whenever the votes of interesting and the votes of mind-blowing are the same number. So we can do that using the if-else statement. So we just write if, and then here we need a condition. And a condition is basically something that returns either true or false. And so for that, we can use one of the logical operators that I showed you earlier. So up here, remember how we used this less than operator, and I also showed you the equal operator. So that's the one we will use right now. So we will say if the votes interesting are equal, so that's 3 equal signs, equal votes mind-blowing, and then curly braces like this, and then let's do something here. So we could log something to the console, but let me show you another function here, which is the alert function. So let's alert this fact is equally interesting and mind-blowing. Okay, now let's save so we can see what happens. And we get this nice window here. So we get this alert window, as it's called, which has our string that we passed here into this alert function. And then as soon as we click OK, the rest of the page can load. Okay, so that is the if statement, which allows us to do something whenever this condition here is true. So if we were to log only this to the console, and this one you don't need to write, no need for that. But if we log this to the console, you see down here that we get the result of true. And so again, the result of using this operator here returns a Boolean value, which is true or false. And that's exactly what we need here in this condition. Okay, now we can also specify an else block, which is basically what happens when this is not true. So in the opposite case. So in this case, let's just log something to the console. Something else. Let's get rid of this. And here we can now say just 15, for example, and now we get something else here in the console. Now we can also actually create an if-else if statement. And so here, there will be another check now. So if this is false, it will go to this branch here, and then this next check here is performed. So we can now say if votes interesting are greater than the votes mind-blowing, then let's say interesting fact. And so that's what we get here now. So again, votes interesting is greater now, 15. So 20 is greater than 15. And so this is true. And so then this is executed. And we can repeat that actually as many times as we want. So the final case is that the votes interesting are greater or actually less than votes mind-blowing. And so then we can log to the console that it's a mind-blowing fact. So let's increase this value to 23 so that we actually reach this code. And now indeed, this one is false, but this one is true. And so then only this code here gets executed. So I hope this makes sense and that it's pretty obvious. Now let me explain something else, which is that there are something called truthy and falsy values. So falsy values are values that will be converted to false whenever they're used in a condition like this here. So a condition in an if statement. Now there are not a lot of falsy values, but the ones we have are 0, empty string, null, and undefined. And let me actually write that down here so you can actually read it. So a 0, an empty string, null, and undefined are falsy. We didn't talk about what these two are yet, but we might come to it once we talk about React. But anyway, this means that we can do something like this. We can just say, if votes, for example, mind-blowing, then we can log to the console like something mind-blowing fact. So that's coming right from here. So from this line of code. And so that's because if it's not a falsy value, then it's a truthy value. So basically a truthy value is everything else. So basically when we place any value here in this condition that is not a falsy value, JavaScript will kind of convert it to true automatically and will then run this code here. Let's specify an else block also here. Let's say not so special. And then watch what happens when I change the votes of mind-blowing to 0. So we get not so special, which means that this part here of the code was executed, which means that this was evaluated to false. And indeed, that's because 0, which is what votes mind-blowing is at the moment, is a falsy value. And so again, falsy values are converted to false automatically by JavaScript when they are evaluated in an expression like this one here in an if-else statement. And that's pretty important to know also when we build our project a bit later on. So when we actually make this interface here really work and really make it dynamic. So for now, again, we are only trying to learn some fundamentals here. And this is definitely an important fundamental. Okay, but now let's actually do something a little bit more helpful using an if-else statement. So moving up here, let's say that we wanted to call the calc_age function, so calc fact age, with the year of 2037. So basically we are saying that the fact was generated, so it was created in 2037. So let's see what result we get. So that's line 43. And here we can see line 43 resulted in -15. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? And so we can now use an if-else statement to change our function here a little bit. So to account for the fact that sometimes this can happen. So when the user inputs a year, basically that is greater than the year we are currently in. So we can do that in two ways. We can either compare the current year with the inputted year, so this one, or we can see if the age is greater than 0 or not. And let's actually try that approach. So let's say if the age is greater or equal 0, so this is yet another logical operator. So this one is greater or equal. So in the case that the age is greater or equal than 0, then we want to return the age. So we write our block and then we return the age. And actually when we only want to do one line of code in case this is true, so In other words, when this block is only one line long, we don't even need the curly braces. So we can remove those. We can remove this. And then here we can write the else. So in this case, let's simply return a string here which says impossible year. So telling the user basically that they used a year that doesn't make sense. Give it a save. And now instead of the -15 we got before, indeed we get impossible year. While for all the other function calls here, we got the age indeed. So these three values right here. And if you remember from the first lecture in this section, we already used an if-else statement here as well. So basically, this condition here is a little bit different than before, but what matters is that it returns either true or false. And we can see that by copy-pasting it, and we can even actually try to paste it here in the console. So just like we did before. So let's do that. And now it returns true. So this is a function basically this contains here that returns true or false. And now if we open it and we run this code again, then it is false because this code that we wrote here made sure to remove the hidden class, right? Remember that? But anyway, let's reload our page and come down here. But in fact, we are actually done with this video. So once again, I encourage you to experiment by writing maybe your own, but actually we are finished with this topic and are ready to move on to the next one.